Hello, I'm Stuart Crainer. Welcome to this series of monthly webinars, Inside Ecosystems, brought to you by the Business Ecosystem Alliance. Our aim at the Alliance is to further knowledge of the ideas and best practice driving the new generation of business ecosystems. The profusion of ideas, tools, and frameworks seeking to better understand ecosystems means nothing if it can't be converted into organizational reality. So today we will hear from the front line where ideas meet practice. We are joined by William Malek and Andreas Holmer, and our theme is optimizing for fulfillment, how and why one company is working to create its own business ecosystem. William Malek is co-author of Executing Your Strategy and Senior Executive Director of the Southeast Asia Innovation Management Research Center. And Andreas Holmer is the co-founder and CEO of MAQE, an 80-person technology services firm in Thailand specializing in personalized commerce. Since 2018, he's been writing WorkMatters, a weekly newsletter on and about the future of work and organizations. MAQE recently announced that it was adopting Rendanheyi, Hire's innovative organizational model and philosophy. So in this session, Andreas will explain why MAQE is taking an ecosystemic approach to organization and how it will help the company optimize for fulfillment. Please send in any comments and questions as the session progresses. So let's get practical. First, William Malek will set the scene, and then Andreas Holmer will get down to practical details, and then we will take questions and have a conversation. So, William Malek, over to you.
And away we go. So welcome, everybody. I would like to introduce you to Andreas Holmer. And the short story with Andreas and I was about a year ago. Andreas found out that I was being directly involved with the Hire Model Research Institute. And he came to me with a lot of passion and very direct. Hey, I really want to work with you. What's going on here? I've been studying this for a while. And through that conversation, I realized that Andreas actually had a major transformative purpose. And as I think you might hear in his talk today, you know, it's about, you see the little subline there, humanizing the future. You know, what's powerful is that when we look at humanity and the issues going on in society today, to really pay attention to what's happening with our people, what's happening to the quality of work that we're in. Andreas is fully dedicated to that. So just based on that, when he came to me, I said, let's do something. So with that, one of the things that began to happen is Andreas realized that to move forward, there was a lot more to do with actually embedding the concepts of Rendanheyi in terms of the principles. And through that discussion, I said, wow, why don't we collaborate? Because I have a very passionate interest of actually figuring out with the new ISO 56002 standard, which many of you might know about, is the a standard for innovation management systems. I said, let's figure out how we can build better and more capabilities based on the Rendanheyi principles by using the standard. And so what's happened through that dialogue, Andreas and I have been collaborating on the build out of the capabilities that he is going to share with you today. And one of them is about this little ecosystem that sits right in the middle of his business model now that's emerging. And it's fascinating because one of the issues that we know today, and one idea that I have, is that if you really truly want to approach the development of a strategy about business ecosystem strategies in the market, you cannot do that without looking at the innovation that you must at least attend to in your operating model. And if you get those two right, things start to flow much differently. So with that, I'm very excited to introduce you to Andreas. So Andreas, I'm looking forward to the comments, and it's all over to you now.
Thank you very much. And let me make sure that we get the screen share working before we start here. There you go. everyone can see my screen? Yeah, very good. So thank you, William, and thank you, Stuart, and for the opportunity to address the audience. It's nice to be among fellow travelers, as it were. I will try my best to explain why MAQE is undergoing this transformation and also how we are going about doing it. But first, I want to say two things. Number one is that everything you'll see from now on is experimentation. We are learning by doing. And if you have thoughts and ideas for how we might be more successful, I am all ears. So there's content information at the end. Please reach out. Sharing is caring. We're all better for it. And second, if you are a practitioner and you're looking to go down the ecosystem path, I hope this is useful to you. We are figuring things out as we go along, but it is difficult to get going. And so I hope whatever you see here can actually be helpful. So that's that. Like William said, MAQE is an 80-person professional services firm in Thailand. We have 80 people in 2 offices here in Bangkok, where I am, and also in Khon Kaen, which is the northeast of Thailand. And we are specialists in this thing called personalized commerce, which mean either of two things. One, that we help our customers design and build omni-channel commerce solutions, and or help them do data activation and leverage the data to make their commerce experiences personalized. And as you can see from this timeline that I'm showing right now, it is a service offering and a value proposition that has evolved over time, which I'm sure is the case for everyone, right? And I can talk about this for a long time, but we don't have time for that. So I want to direct your attention instead to what's been going on internally during that time frame. And there's quite a few things, as you can see. By far the most important one is the fact that we got our start in December of 2011 on the premise that happy people do good work. And our understanding for what that means has definitely evolved and changed over time. But the basic premise is still true today. And that's this fact that, or the assumption, I should say, that if we get the people part correct, everything else will fall into place. And so everything we've done since then, all the things we've experimented with, everything, all the new and better ways of working that we've tried out, has been in pursuit of that goal. But like I said, it has matured somewhat, and today we think of happiness at work as being the product of personal fulfillment. And so we say today that we are optimizing for fulfillment, and we think about personal fulfillment as being the product of the impact that someone has in their work, the learning that they amass through that work, and also the relationships that they create with colleagues and with customers. And that's an important context for everything that comes next, because now we enter into the space where MAQE first came into contact with Hire and the Rendanheyi organizational model. And I want to pause here a little bit to emphasize the fact that we are in Southeast Asia, and things have progressed rapidly here for the past decade, at least as long as I have been here. Today there's a thriving startup ecosystem, and there's a fantastic job market, and et cetera. But the type of progressive organizational practices that we are talking about today is still met with a fair amount of skepticism. And for a company like MAQE, we don't let that stop us per se, but it gets tiring to have to explain or defend the way that we work, and so we've kept it internal. Basically, we made it a distinction between what we do externally and what we do internally. I think it's been too easy for a lot of organizations to say that this type of operating model works for well-funded tech startups in Silicon Valley, but it doesn't work here, wherever here might be, right? That's a shame, and it gets old for a company like us trying to do things differently. And so it's that context in I don't know, mid 2019 when we first found the Rendanheyi model and started reading about it. And fast forward a few years or a few months, and we started talking to William and IMRC and HMI, and it's really interesting to see like everyone telling us that you can't do these things here, and then lo and behold, here's this massive manufacturing company based in China that are putting a lot of these well-funded tech startups in Silicon Valley to shame in terms of their progressive organizational practices. And not only that, they're making an absolute killing to boot. And so for us, clearly we see that, okay, this is not only possible, but much more than that, it's possible right here in Southeast Asia, in Asia proper. So that's where we found ourselves at the end of 2020, 2021, and 80 people wanting to further maximize fulfillment, having identified Rendanheyi, and as William was saying, by extension, the ISO 56002 framework. We saw that as a vehicle for us to take the next step. So the question then becomes, how do you take that step? How do you go from having a sort of traditional organization to something that emulates the type of organizational model that Hire has in place, right? And it's a difficult task to get started with, but for us, it came down to two things that we felt we wanted to do as a starting point. And I want to talk to you about those two things right now, starting with the first one, which we call MOS, or the MAQE operating system. Now, the building blocks of the MAQE operating system has been around since we founded the company, and so it's been in there, but this is the first time we've actually codified and formalized this into an actual system. And if you are familiar with the type of role-based organizational structure that you find in alternative approaches like sociocracy or holocracy, this will sound familiar. We're not necessarily reinventing the wheel here. Rather, we are adapting it to our own needs. And it works like this. I would argue that most organizations today are built with what we call in software circles a monolithic architecture, meaning that it's designed as one whole full of interdependencies. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. If your environment is stable, a monolithic architecture is rather quick to build, and it's a good way to reach economies of scale. And that could be very fruitful, as the Industrial Revolution clearly shows. But there are issues with that too. And what we've discovered in the software world, a decade ago, was that these types of systems are not necessarily very resilient. They're not very agile, not very flexible. And so what we try to do instead is to adopt a pattern that we call microservices, which essentially means that you deconstruct the whole into the components parts, and then you run the organization based on this microservice with services with tight integration between them. And this type of design pattern is much more resilient and much more flexible and agile. And so this is exactly the kind of pattern that we're trying to insert into MAQE as well. The difference is that instead of a microservice, we have job roles. And so what we're doing currently is to look inside the organization and distinguish each and every job role that we have, and then put them to paper. And as you can imagine, that is quite an undertaking. We're about 80% through our work currently, but it definitely takes some time. But we also think it's worthwhile. It's something that we have to do, right? So the expectation is that anyone at MAQE, once this is done, will have between 3 to 5 job roles at any point in time, and these job roles can change over time. And that's stage one of MOS, but there's more than that, right? The job roles that we are identifying also fit within either of 6 types of organizational units. And some of these units has been around within MAQE for 8 to 7 years, 7-8 years, and some are new. And I'm not going to go into detail in terms of what each of these organizational units does, but they do all have different types of focus. They are trying to achieve different things, and they also differ in terms of the time that they are expected to be operational, for example, and the number of people that are involved. And so that's a second level to MOS that is important to keep in mind. But we're still not done, because there's a third level, what we call platform. And on the platform level, in holacracy and sociocracy, you just call this the parent circle, because it's a parent circle and there's sub-circles inside of it. But we're choosing the word platform for a very particular purpose. It's a attribution to Rendanheyi, which also feature platforms. But importantly for us is that MOS version 1.0 is introducing a brand new role that we've never had before, which is that of the platform owner. And the platform owner in this visual is the single dot on each platform. Now, this role promises to be very, very important. It is a role charged with orchestrating the work that goes on that platform. This person or persons, because there can be several people holding the same role, will have resources, financial or otherwise, at their disposal that they can use to invest in the work that goes on. And so they are essentially an investment manager. And they also need to be domain experts in the area that they operate, which means that the platform owner on the learning platform needs to be an expert in that domain. So these are the building blocks of MOS that we're trying to put into place. And we're thinking of MOS itself as the API, another software analogy, the application programming interface that structures the space in between platforms and units, and enables ideas and resources and information to flow freely between these different areas of the company. And this way, we hope to create our internal ecosystem that lets people move around freely, does experimenting with new job roles and maximizing learning. And also, this hopefully allows us to break down silos, because people and information will move around very freely. So that's number one. That's the first thing that we're doing, a necessarily first step to unbundle the organization. But I think, as most of you that call in right now probably already know, that the term ecosystem really only gets interesting once you take an outside-in approach, which gets us to initiative number 2, which focuses on this one new platform that we have in MOS, which will feature all our soon-to-be micro enterprises. And I mentioned I wouldn't go too much into the hire model, but I need to say that Hire's 80,000 employees are distributed among 4,500 autonomous micro enterprises, which is essentially standalone business units with their own separate P&L. And it boggles the mind, to be honest, how Hire is able to orchestrate this at scale. But luckily for us, we're not at that scale yet, and so we don't have to worry about doing it with 80,000 people. We have to worry about doing it for 80. And we have some ideas for how to get started with that. Which brings me to initiative number 2, which is something that we call MAQE Ventures. So as a company, we've been lucky enough to work with a number of venture studios over the years. And a venture studio is essentially a business whose business it is to launch startups. And so we're taking a page out of their playbook, so to speak, and designing our own venture building program internally at MAQE. And we hope that this program will allow us to guide fledgling micro enterprises on their path towards product market fit. And so what we will be doing in the next 6, 12, 18, 24 months is to identify standalone service and product offerings within MAQE, take them out and make them separate micro enterprises on this one industry platform that we're creating, and then guide them towards a stage where they can stand on their own 2 feet, basically. And the way we envision doing this is in a 4-step process. And I'm not going into too much detail here, because we can talk about it later, maybe. But the 4 stages, the 4 incubation stages, are called ideation, validation, operation and acceleration. And each step of that incubation process will present the microenterprise with business outcomes that needs to be achieved. And they need to be achieved within a predefined time frame. So, for example, the ME might have 3 months in order to secure 6 contracts or something like that. And if they are unable to do that, they will fold, and the people within the microenterprise will come back into MAQE, where they will be encouraged to take their learning and try again. Which is quite a nice thing in terms of us trying to encourage people to take risks. If, however, they are able to graduate from stage 4, MAQE as a company is committed to spin that micro enterprise off as a separate entity and turn the entrepreneur into an entrepreneur by giving them equity in that new entity. And by doing so, we will be fulfilling this notion that Hire calls the 3 rights. So the ME owner in the stage 5 microenterprise will have the right to make decisions, hire talent, and distribute resources, including setting their own salaries. Right? And at that point, they will be part of the overall MAQE ecosystem. So this is what we're doing currently. This is a work in progress. MOS is already in place. The MAQE Ventures program is coming into place. We're currently doing financial modeling to make sure that we know exactly how much financial resources we can devote to what enterprise in what stage of the incubation process. And we're looking into different types of contracts that we can use to manage expectations with our ME founders. But there are already 3 microenterprises in the works, and so there are multiple work streams happening at the same time, which is really cool. So this is essentially what we're trying to do right now. We are using MOS in order to go from a monolithic to a microservice architecture in an organization. And we're using the MAQE Venture program to turn employees into entrepreneurs and go all the way to the 3 rights, as Hire calls them. And again, the whole point here being that we want to optimize for fulfillment. That is the leading goal that we all have. And that's what I have to share with you. If you are interested, have thoughts, opinions, anything that I've shared, please feel free to reach out. We'd love to have a conversation. You'll find more information about MAQE on make.com. That's MAQE.com. And if you want to get in touch with me, I'm on andreasholmer.com. You'll find me on Twitter as well, and stuff like that. And on the website, as Stuart mentioned, you can also sign up to the WorkMatters newsletter, where we share a lot of the information that we are, all the things that we're doing within MAQE. And so that's a good way to keep in touch as well. So that's that. Stuart, any question?
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Andreas. Yeah, it's really interesting how you've really thoughtfully captured elements of Hire, but really. You're bringing lots of elements there, I think. I mean, yep. I wondered. I mean, you're from Sweden, and I wonder how much of the Scandinavian culture and approach to management and business has influenced what you're doing.
Oh, that's a good question. I would say though that MAQE is a Thai company in a sense that yes, I am Swedish and I am one of the co-founders, but I am one of the few foreigners at MAQE. The 80 people we are a Thai company, and so on the one hand, what we're doing is progressive for I think for in any part of the world, but. The best way I can put this is that a lot of things are changing here. The young people in Thailand has a ton of ideas, a ton of potential, and what we think of as progressive is just in lieu of waiting for the young people here to take over and run things, because once they do, things will change. And they will change quickly. So for sure, I'm bringing with me learnings from Scandinavia. I also spent 5 years in Silicon Valley and San Francisco and Seattle, so I'm bringing that into this picture as well. But this is a team effort, and so there's a little bit of everyone in here, I think.
How difficult, was there any cultural obstacles internally when you've been explaining these ideas to people?
Not really. The issue that I think we have is that as being a professional services firm, we are 100% focused on delivering client work, which means that all the kind of organizational development that we're doing has to be done off to one side. And so the challenge, if anything, has been to find the time to get this done. For example, sitting down and mapping out all these job roles is a massive undertaking, and it wouldn't be possible unless a number of people put their the nights and weekends to the task. So that has been the main thing for us.
William,
yes.
What's your take on what Andreas and MAQE are doing? What are you learning from their experiences?
So unlike Hire, who is at one level is a product manufacturing organization, evolving into a much larger ecological service system, if you would, I think MAQE's in the professional services side, it's a very knowledge-intensive business. So one might think about them as being far more fluid, because just literally the level of knowledge that has to be mastered to keep up with the changes that we're seeing in decentralization, personalization, etc. It seems to me that the strategic fit of the kind of work that MAQE is doing to decentralize, to allow much more rapid development with solutions with clients is an optimal approach. And I think that what they're doing is absolutely going to pay off in a longer term. Back to my comment earlier, that if you really pay attention to the operational model to allow yourself to be agile enough, and I don't mean agile in the project management term, but literally organizationally flexible to respond at a level for the needs in the marketplace, as we see now with COVID and fourth wave COVID's being projected, et cetera, the capacity of flexibility is going to be critical. So I think they're lined up for all different reasons to be able to compete and or grow much more efficiently through the kind of application. And they're not, as you heard, he's adapting and adopting the principles to allow him to experience what Hire's experiencing at scale around the globe, almost, I wouldn't say naturally, but more efficiently. So anyway, I think he's right on track. There's a lot more foundational stuff, as he's recognized, that needs to be in place to allow it to begin to scale and start. But he's starting small, and he's doing what good transformation practice is: pick a pilot, go do it, learn from it, and then reapply it.
Yeah, I think Shiva, who's watching, points out it's learning by doing and action learning, which I think has got to be the best way to go. But it always strikes me that Hire's model is inspirational, but can't be copied wholesale. So, and I think what you're doing, Andreas, is taking some elements of it, some of the most interesting element, micro enterprise, and some of the language, but taking the stuff that you think will work for you. And I think that's a very different approach from, say, 1990s when everybody was trying to emulate Toyota. And previously, the understanding previously was that we could embrace a particular management model and import it wholesale to the organization. Whereas this is much more, it's much more flexible, as William said, and much more built around agility.
Yeah, I think that's true. And we should also remember that Rendanheyi is, I typically, rather than saying that it's an operational system itself, it's more of a philosophy, right? There's a few tenets, a few principles that if you follow them to their logical conclusion, you end up with an organizational model like the one Hire has today. But there's nothing inherent in Rendanheyi that says that you have to have EMCs or MEs or all of these things, right? At the end of the day, it comes down to zero distance to the customer, and everyone is an entrepreneur. And so, what that is both a strength and a weakness in one way, right? Because on the one hand, it makes it easy to adapt and adopt, but it also makes it difficult to get started, because how do you implement a philosophy, right? You have to sort of chart your own course. And so another, I mentioned both sociocracy and holocracy, and there's the other options as well that I actually think can work alongside, because if you think of this as a continuum with holocracy on the one hand and Rendanheyi on the other. Holocracy is very prescriptive. Rendanheyi is not, and so you can actually apply the principles of Rendanheyi in a holocratic context, and you end up with something like Zappos and their market-based dynamics, which is really cool too. But like you said, context is everything, right? We are a professional services firm. We are small, and this makes sense for us currently.
And how does something like the ISO, how does that fit into it? Because in some ways it seems contradictory in, as you say, the higher Rendanheyi is a philosophy. So there's a certain amount of ambiguity and flexibility built in, whereas ISO and some sort of authentication certification is coming at it from a different angle.
I'll let William, you need to talk about this too, but I'll just say quickly that for me, even though I would say the ISO standard is clearly designed for big businesses, it's sort of it's a massive system, but it did for me make because ISO 56002 is an innovation management system, and so we are trying to take an ecosystemic approach to organization, and the innovation management framework is a system in itself. So all of a sudden there was a structure, a practice there that we could learn from and adapt to our needs. Made it a little bit easier to get started. William, would you want to add to that?
Well, I'll just add that I think when you get into the standard, what you find out is that they are also basing it on the design of principles, as opposed to saying you need to do this, this, and this in these particular phases. So I think it allows, again, for more adaptation. And I had the same, literally, my first reaction when I heard this, oh my God, this is going to be a practice framework and all these tools and techniques, and you got to be certified to do this and that. And it's not. And this is one of the deep learnings that, in fact, Andreas and I had going through the first boot camp, if you would. And it provides for the guidance of what creates effective moving from an idea to an application or a product or service in the marketplace. And so I think it's a perfect match for Rendanheyi, because it's allowing for people to think deeper. What fits in your context? There's no silver bullet, never has existed, never will be. I think it's even getting more decentralized, such that you need to be able to think through for yourself, what can you do? So Andreas is starting out at the level of capability that he has with his people, his systems, and his technology. And the standard allows him to look forward to one step forward. How can that be better, moving towards the principle of maximizing human potential as its almost core optimization strategy? So anyway, that's my take on how you frame up the ISO situation in this context.
Yeah, no, it's a really interesting discussion. Andreas, one thing that really I thought was really interesting was the job roles, units, and platforms. Because it was really interesting the way you divided them. Talk us through that process, how that worked. Did you figure out that you needed job roles, units, and platforms, and then figure out what they were from, or did you start thinking, well, we need job roles, or how did it work?
So no, it's much more convoluted.
Yeah. I suspected it might.
Yeah. Let's see here. So we've had some of the organizational units that you saw, specifically the crews and the guilds and the agile teams, have been around within MAQE for a longest time. And if someone in the audience is familiar with the Spotify model, they might recognize some of the names. We don't use them the same way, but then the names are similar. So we basically had the the organizational units first, and crews and guilds became our first foray into self-management in 2013, and then the other things that sort of come after that. Now the job roles came in later, and it came in specifically because I started talking and learning from people in the holacratic and sociocratic space, and learning how they had gone about distinguishing job roles, and I could see how incredibly useful that would be. Sort of a sideline, but at some point, my co-founder Andrew and I were prompted to sit down and write down everything that we did, and we got the question first, saying, okay, well, do you guys know what you are responsible for? Each person, and we're like, yeah, that's obviously we work closely together, so we know exactly what Andrew is responsible for, what Andreas is responsible for, and then we were challenged. Okay, we'll sit down and write this down then, and so we did that, and it turns out that we were not in sync at all. We things that he was taking care of, he thought that I was going to do, and it was a mess, right? And so I could see how this could be very useful, and also if I'm overworked and I have 10 job roles clearly defined on a digital platform, I can go to William and say, hey, William, I'm really busy. Can you take this job role for me? It's about 5 hours a week. Can you do that for me? And William's like, yeah, sure, I can do that. And it's clearly defined here what exactly that is. And so we have a digital platform internally to manage that. That we store all the job roles, and we can share them, and we can hand them over to people.
Yeah, I was particularly interested in trade guilds, which is one of the units. You got people squads, micro enterprises, trade guilds. What are trade guilds? Because it sounds like something from the 17th century.
Yeah. Well, I mean that's where the word comes from. Essentially, what it is that it's our way of making sure that we stay on top of new developments. So within MAQE, you will find a number of trade guilds or simply guilds. We have one for machine learning, one for IoT, one for design, one for quality assurance, and it's a self-organizing unit that comes together either once per week or once per month and talks about new developments in that space. And so it's sort of an unconference style format where people show up and they give a talk and share information with others. And we look at that as an investment in our competitiveness, because at the end of the day, as a service company, the skills of our people is the only competitive advantage we have, and so it's something that we are willing to spend time and energy on, and so that's what that is. They don't. I think if you saw it, we use OKRs and stuff internally, but the trade guilds don't have OKRs. They're simply there to share knowledge and information with each other.
Interesting. Comment from Manoj, who's watching from Ely in the UK. Beautiful cathedral in Ely. He says, interesting, insightful session. Organizations need to embrace growth mindset, support psychological safety for their employees, and be a learning organization. And what I thought was interesting when you were talking, Andreas, was the starting point was happiness and fulfillment of the employees.
Right. And what like I mentioned, like what is happiness, right? On the one hand, I get happy by eating chocolate cake, but 10 years from now, that is not going to be a source of fulfillment, right? So hence us thinking that it's impact and it's learning and it's relationship, and the truth is some of that is actually uncomfortable at times. Sometimes we have to challenge ourselves and do things that we find uncomfortable in order to attain a higher level of fulfillment. So this notion of growth mindset, I think, is very true. As long as you stay in place and don't try new things, that's a problem. And here again, actually, the job roles feel an important factor because it's a way for someone to experiment with a new job role in relative safety within the organization. So we encourage cross-training. I mean, people trying on maybe a QA wants to become a product manager, or maybe one of our engineers wants to help out with business development. That's an opportunity because there are job roles designed specifically for that.
So where does it go next then, Andreas? What's your where do you see it going in the future? Have you got a 6-month plan or 12-month plan where you think this will go?
Well, I'll mention two things specifically that I know must happen, and one very interesting area that I'm learning about. The first two, in MOS currently, there was only one industry platform. In Hire, you will find many, and this is simply because we are a small company, and we don't feel like MAQE is a strong enough brand in order to that can handle multiple different value propositions. And so right now, the one industry platform that we have is personalized commerce, because that's what the company does. And so every micro enterprise that we ship from now on will tap into and further strengthen that value proposition. But that will hopefully change. So in the future, I hope that we will be able to add additional complementary industry platforms and micro enterprises in new areas, such as venture building or organizational transformation. Another thing that we haven't talked about yet is this notion of the boundary-less organization. So far, we're only talking about MAQE, but I think another really interesting angle is once you have an ecosystem up and running, why not bring in organizations from the outside to play parts of that system, right? And we already have partners. William and I are partners, it's just a matter of looking at that from an ecosystem lens. And then the last thing I would say that I don't know enough about this yet, but I'm super interested, is this notion of the decentralized autonomous organizations, or the DAO, in the crypto space, which to me holds a tremendous potential. And I don't know enough about this to be intelligent yet, but it seems to me that what Hire has gone to create on the one hand is simultaneously being invented within the crypto space. And a lot of the people that are in the crypto space are now going up about creating their own organizations, and they are using the cryptocurrency design patterns to do those organizations, and they end up being very similar. And so there's a melding of ideas here that I'm very interested to learn more about, and so that's where I'm looking at. And there's an extension there to smart contracts and all of these things, right, which can further help to enable and facilitate the ecosystem.
William, as Andreas said, MAQE is a 80-person company, so it's very small in global terms. So what are the implications, do you think, of the kind of initiatives that MAQE's undergoing for larger corporations?
Well, I think there's something to learn from everybody that's attempting this journey to more decentralization, no matter what the size is. And so from that standpoint, especially in Thailand, I think for larger companies here, there is a much stronger cultural, I don't want to call it barrier, but mindset that has to be looked at for what it is. And it requires, Rendanheyi requires accountability, responsibility, transparency, and you own what you do. And in a world with large companies in Southeast Asia, a lot of them are very patriarchal, come from a very, I call it a kind of a Confucian philosophy of, respect for the elders, which I totally agree with. And I love the collective society, but also has to have a new way of looking at things so that it can allow for creativity. It can allow for safety, because in the Thai societies, saving face is extremely important. Relationships are everything, the collective. And I think this is one of the big opportunities to provide a platform for the young, energetic generation that wants something new and different. And they're looking at the world falling apart, quite honestly, and going, we got to do something differently fast. And so I think they want to be part of the solution as well. So I think in taking the young generation that's here, like MAQE has quite a few, and let them begin to experiment with the world, right? Humanizing the world that they see, and let them be involved with engaging the change. And I think that's the powerful part, and allowing for these catalysts to occur in a society that normally would simply wait to have your boss tell you what to do. I don't want to call it micromanagement, but it tends to be a wait and see type of environment. And you can't do that in a world that's changing fast. You got to have different models to work and different culture in terms of the organization.
I suppose one obvious measure of success, if we look, say, in a year or two's time, and Andreas, is the number of enterprises that have spun off MAQE. You talk about the 4-step incubation process. It always strikes me when I've talked to Hire about their kind of micro enterprises and how they spin off, that the fuel behind it is really trust. There's kind of mutual trust that what's good for the micro enterprise is good for the large corporation.
Yeah, no, for sure. I agree with that. Nothing, an organizational operating system like this cannot work unless you trust in people's ability to do what's right. And as a quote unquote manager, you have to be comfortable with stepping back and letting things take its course, right? There's the notion of trust within organizations is a super interesting area, and it's surely lacking in most organizations. Even though I think you won't find a single organization out there that says that we are low on trust. Everyone believes that they are, but then the actions speak louder than words, right? So,
yeah. No, as you say, it's a really, really interesting area, and I think the initiatives you're taking are ways of building up trust, but are also built on trust.
For sure, and you just take this notion of remote work now. See how many companies that will take the opportunity to bring everyone back post-COVID. I'm sure a lot of organizations want to. For MAQE, we were lucky. We went fully remote before the pandemic, and so it was very easy for us to handle that change. And we're not going back. But you can still hear the talk saying, okay, well, can you actually trust people if do you know they're working if you can't see them? And if that's the mentality, then there's trust issues there for sure.
We're out of time, Andreas and William. Thank you very much both for your insights from Thailand. Andreas, the stuff you're doing at MAQE is really impressive, and best of luck as it develops. What's interesting is that it is a true evolution of ideas rather than a set template of how to do things. You can check out Andreas's ideas at WorkMatters. That's your weekly newsletter. Worth checking out, and that kind of gives people an update of how your ideas are developing as well. And I'm sure Williams must be working on another book.
Yes, for sure.
Always. So, William and Andreas, thank you very much, and we hope you'll be able to join us next month for another session looking inside ecosystems. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Stuart.